Hello guys, welcome to tonight's read along stream. So for the first time I will be reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. This will be over quite a few streams, but I'm going to read the first two chapters tonight. As it says in the chat there, any donations go to mental health charities. I'm just reading actually in the bio part about Shirley Jackson, then her very first novel, The Lottery, received hate mail at the time, but is now seen as like a bit of a classic, and she went on to a fantastic career. So only 48 though when she died, which is obviously very sad. But yeah, so I'm gonna make a start on the book. I'm probably take the occasional refreshment break. But first two chapters tonight, and then thinking maybe later in the week I might do the next two chapters. I'm thinking maybe election night might be a good night to do that, since that night might be a bit, following the election could be a bit traumatizing. Of course, me and Rachel reviewed the series a few years ago, all 10 episodes of the Netflix series, so that's something you guys could check out if you haven't checked out those reviews, maybe to go along with me reading the book. But I'll make a start anyway. So chapter 1. No live organism can continue for long to exist solely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are surprised by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and the doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and the stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Dr. John Montage was a doctor of philosophy. He had taken his degree in anthropography, feeling obscurely that in this field he might have come closest to his true vocation, the analysis of supernatural manifestations. He was scrupulous about the use of his title because his investigations began so utterly unscientific. He hoped to borrow an air of respectability, even scholarly authority, from his education. It had cost him a good deal in money and pride, since he was not a begging man to rent Hill House for 3 months, but he expected absolutely to be compensated for his pains by the cessation following upon the publication of his definitive work on the causes and effects of psychic disturbances in a house commonly known as haunted. He had been looking for honestly haunted house all his life. When he heard of Hill House, he had been at first doubtful, then hopeful, then indefatigable, fateable, if that's a word. He was not the man to let go of Hill House once he had found it. Dr. Montetal's intentions with regard to Hill House derived from the methods of the intrepid 19th century ghost hunters. He was going to go and live in Hill House and see what happened there. It was his intention at first to follow the example of the anonymous lady who went to stay at Balachin House and ran a summer-long house party for skeptics and believers, with croquet and house party for croquet and ghost watching as the understanding attractions, but skeptics, believers, and good croquet players are harder to come by today. Dr. Montague was forced to engage assistants. Perhaps the leisurely ways of Victorian life lent themselves more agreeably to the devices of psychic investigation, or perhaps the painstaking documentation of phenomena has largely gone as a means of determining accuracy at any rate. Dr. Montague had not only to engage assistants, but to search for them. Perhaps he thought of himself as careful and cautious. He spent considerable time looking for his assistants. He combined the records of the psychic societies, the black files of sensational newspapers, the reports of the pathologists, and assembled a list of names of people who had, in one way or the other, at one time or another, no matter how briefly or dubiously, been involved in abnormal events. From his list, he first eliminated the names of people who were dead. When he had then crossed off the names of those who seemed to him publicly seekers of subnormal intelligence or unsuitable because of a clear tendency to take the centre of the stage, he had a list of perhaps a dozen names. Each of these people then received a letter from Dr. Montague extending the invitation to spend all or part of the summer at a comfortable country house, old but perfectly equipped with plumbing, electricity, central heating, and clear mattresses. The purpose of their stay, the letter stated clearly, was not to observe and explore the various unsavory stories which had circulated about the house for most of its 80 years of existence. Dr. Montague's letters did not say openly the Hill House was haunted, because Dr. Montague was a man of science, and until he had actually experienced a psychic manifestation in Hill House, he would not trust his luck too far. Consequently, his letters had a certain ambiguous dignity calculated to catch at the imagination of a very special sort of reader. To his dozen letters, Dr. Montague had 4 replies, the other 8 or so candidates having presumably moved and left the no forwarding address, or possibly having lost interest in the supernormal, or even perhaps never having existed at all. To the four who replied, Dr. Montague wrote again, naming a specific day when the house would be officially regarded as ready for occupancy, and enclosing the detailed directions for reaching it, since he was forced to explain information about finding the house was extremely difficult to get, particularly from the rural community which surrounded it. On the day before he was to leave Hill House, Dr. Montague was persuaded to take into his select company a representative of the family who owned the house, and a telegram arrived from one of his candidates, backing out with a clearly manufactured excuse. Another never came or wrote, perhaps because of some pressing personal problem which had intervened. The other two came. So I'll just take a short break there. Okay. By the way, I think I'm saying the doctor's name right, Dr. Montague. You can always correct me in the chat or something if I'm not, but it's sort of how it seems to be spelled. Elena Vance was 32 years old when she came to Hill House. The only person in the world she genuinely hated, now that her mother was dead, was her sister. She disliked her brother-in-law and her 5-year-old niece, and she had no friends. This was owing largely to the 11 years she had spent caring for her invalid mother, which had left her with some proficiency as a nurse and inability to face strong sunlight without blinking. She could not remember ever being truly happy in her adult life. Her years with her mother had been built up devotedly around small guilts and small reproaches, constant weariness and unending despair. Without ever wanting to become reserved and shy, she had spent a long time alone with no one to love, that it was difficult for her to talk, even casually, to another person without self-consciousness and an awkward inability to find words. Her name had turned up on Dr. Montague's list because one day when she was 12 years old and her sister was 18, and their father had been dead for not quite a month, showers of stones had fallen on their house without any warning or any indication of purpose or reason, dropping from the ceilings, rolling loudly down the walls, breaking windows, and pattering maddeningly on the roof. The stones continued intermittently for 3 days, during which Elena and her sister were less unnerved by the stones than by the neighbours and the sightseers who gathered daily outside the front door, and by their mother's blind, hysterically insistence that all of this was due to malicious, backbiting people on the block who had had it for her ever since she came. After 3 days, Elena and her sister were removed to the house of a friend, and the stones stopped falling, nor did they ever return, although Elena and her sister and her mother went back to living in the house, and the feud with the entire neighbourhood was never ended. The story had been forgotten by everyone except the people Dr. Montague consulted. It had certainly been forgotten by Elena and her sister, each of whom had proposed at the time than the other was responsible. During the whole underside of her life, ever since her first memory, Elena had been waiting for something like Hill House. Caring for her mother, lifting a cross old lady from her chair to her bed, settling an endless little trays of soup and oatmeal, steering herself to the filthy laundry, Elena had held fast to the belief that someday something would happen. She had accepted the invitation to Hill House by return mail, although her brother-in-law had insisted upon calling a couple of people to make sure that this Dr. Fellow was not aiming to introduce Elena to savage rites not unconnected with matters Elena's sisters deemed improper for an unmarried young woman to know. Perhaps Elena's sister whispered in the privacy of the marital bedroom. Perhaps Dr. Montague, if that was really his name, after all, perhaps this was Dr. Montague, used these women for some experiments. You know, experiments the way they do. Elena's sisters dwelt rightly upon experiments she had heard these doctors did. Elena had no such ideas, or having them, was not afraid. Elena, in short, would have gone anywhere. Theodora, that was as much name as she used. Her sketches were signed Theo, and on her apartment door and the window of her shop and her telephone listing and her pale stationery and the bottom of the lovely photograph of her which stood on the mantel, the name was always only Theodore. Theodore was not at all like Elena. Duty and conscience were for Theodore attributes which belong properly to Girl Scouts. Theodore's world was one of delight and soft colours. She had come onto Dr. Montague's list because going laughing into the laboratory, bringing with her a rash of floral perfume, she had somehow been amused and excited over her own incredible skill to identify correctly 18 cards out of 20, 15 cards out of 20, 19 cards out of 20, held up by an assistant only of sight and hearing. The name of Theodora shone in the records of the laboratory, and so came inevitably to Dr. Montague's attention. Theodora had been entertained by Dr. Montague's first letter and answered it out of curiosity. Perhaps the reckoning knowledge in Theodora which had told her the names of symbols on cards held out of sight urged her on her way to Hill House. Annette fully intended to decline the invitation. Yet perhaps the stirring, urgent sense again when Dr. Montague's confirming letter arrived. Theodora had tempted and had somehow plunged wantonly into a violent quarrel with the friend with whom she had shared an apartment. Things were said on both sides which only time could eradicate. Theodora had deliberately and heartily smashed the lovely little figurine her friend had carved of her, and her friend had cruelly ripped to shreds the volume of Alfred de Musset, which had been a birthday present from Theodora, taking particular pains with the page which bore Theodora's loving, teasing inscription. These acts were of course unforgettable, and before they could laugh over them together, time would have gone by. Theodora had written that night according to Dr. Montague's invitation and departed in cold silence the next day. Theodora, probably my favourite character from the Netflix series. So pretty strong introduction there. Luke Sanderson was a liar. He was a thief. His aunt, who was the owner of Hill House, was found fond of pointing out that her nephew had the best education, the best clothes, the best taste, and the worst companions of anyone she had ever known. She would have leaped at any chance to put him safely away for a few weeks. The family lawyer was prevailed upon to persuade Dr. Montague that the house could on no account be rented for him for his purposes without the confining presence of a member of the family during his stay. And perhaps at their first meeting, the doctor perceived in Luke a kind of strength or cat-like instinct for self-preservation, which made him almost as anxious as Mrs. Sanderson to have Luke with him in the house. At any rate, Luke was amused, his aunt grateful, and Dr. Montague more than satisfied. Mrs. Sanderson told the family lawyer that at any rate there was really nothing in the house Luke could steal. The old silver there was of some value, she told the lawyer, but it represented an almost insuperable difficulty for Luke. It required energy to steal it and transform it into money. Mrs. Sanderson did Luke an injustice. Luke was not at all likely to make off with the family silver, or Dr. Montague's watch, or Theodora's bracelet. His dishonesty was largely confined to taking petty cash from his aunt's pocketbook and cheating at cards. He was also apt to sell the watches and cigarette cases given him, fondly and with pretty blushes by his aunt's friends. Some day Luke would inherit Hill House, but he had never thought to find himself living in it. I just don't think we should take the car, is all, Elena's brother-in-law said stubbornly. It's half my car, Elena said. I helped pay for it. I just don't think we should take it, is all, her brother-in-law said. He appealed to his wife. It isn't fair that she should have use of it for the whole summer and to have to do without it. Carrie drives in it all the time and I never even take it out to the garage, Elena said. Besides, you'll be in the mountains all summer and you can't use it there, Carrie. You know you won't use the car in the mountains. But suppose poor little Linny got sick or something and we needed a car to get her to a doctor. It's half my car, Elena said. I mean to take it. Suppose even Carrie got sick. Suppose we couldn't get a doctor and needed to go to a hospital. I want it. I mean it. I mean to take it. I don't think so. Kerry spoke slowly, deliberately. We don't know where you're going to. We don't know where you're going, do we? You haven't seen to fit to tell us very much about all this, have you? I don't think I can see my way clear to letting you borrow my car. It's half my car. No, Carrie said. You may not. Right. Elena's brother-in-law nodded. We need it, like Carrie says. Carrie smiled slightly. I'd never forgive myself, Elena. If I lent you the car and something happened, how do you know we can trust this doctor fellow? You're still a young woman after all, and the car is worth a good deal of money. Well now, Carrie, I did call Homer in the credit office, and he said this fellow was in good standing at some college or other. Carrie said, still smiling, of course there is every reason to suppose that he is a decent man. But Elena does not choose to tell us where she is going, or how to reach her if we want the car back. Something could happen, and we might never know. Even if Elena, she went on deliberately addressing her teacup, even if Elena prepared to run off to the ends of the earth at the invitation of any man, there is still no reason why she should be permitted to take my car with her. It's half my car. Suppose poor little Linny got sick up there in the mountains with nobody around, no doctor. In any case, Elena, I am sure that I am doing what Mother would have thought best. Mother had confidence in me and would certainly never have approved my lettering. You run wild going off heaven knows where in my car. Or suppose even I get sick up there in. I am sure Mother would have agreed with me, Elena. Besides, Elena's brother-in-law said, struck by a sudden idea, how do you know she'd bring it back in good condition? There has to be a first time for everything, Elena told herself. She got out of the taxi very early in the morning, trembling by now. Perhaps her sister and her half-brother might be stirring with the first faint proddings of suspicion. She took her suitcase quickly out to the taxi while the driver lifted out the cardboard carton which had been on the front seat. Elena overtipped him, wondering if her sister and brother-in-law were following, were perhaps even now turning into the street and telling each other, there she is, just as we thought, the thief, there she is. She turned in haste to go into the huge city garage where their car was kept, glancing nervously towards the end of the street. She crashed into a very little lady sending packages in all directions and saw with dismay a bag of unspent and break on the sidewalk, spilling out a broken piece of cheesecake, tomato slices, a hand roll. Damn you, the little lady screamed, her face pushed up close to Elena's. I was taking it home. Damn you, damn you. I'm so sorry, Elena said. She bent down, but it did not seem possible to scoop up the fragments of tomato and cheesecake and shove them somehow back into the broken bag. The old lady was scowling down and snatching up at her other packages before Elena's could reach them. And at last Elena rose, smiling in convalescent apology. I'm really sorry, so sorry, she said. Damn you, the little old lady said, but more quietly. I was taking it home for my little lunch, and now thanks to you. Perhaps I could pay. Elena took hold of her pocketbook, and the little lady stood very still and thought. I couldn't take money just like that, she said at last. I didn't buy the things you see, they were left over. She snapped her lips angrily. You should have seen the ham they had, she said, but someone else got that. And the cheesecake, and the potato salad, and the chocolate cake, and sorry, I've already read that bit, and the little candles in the little paper dishes. I was too late on everything. And now she and Elena both glanced down at the mess on the sidewalk, and the little lady said, so you see, I couldn't just take money. Not money just from your hand, not for something that was left over. May I buy you something to replace this then? I'm in a terrible hurry, but we could find some place that's open. The little old lady smiled wickedly. I've still got this. Anyway, she said, and she hugged one package tight. You may pay any taxi fare home, she said. Then no one else will be likely to knock me down. Gladly, Elena said, and she turned to the taxi driver who had been waiting, interested. Can you take this lady home? She asked. A couple of dollars will do it, the little lady said, not including the tip for this gentleman, of course. Being as small as I am, she explained daintily, it's quite a hazard. Quite a hazard indeed, people knocking you down. Still, it's a genuine pleasure to find one as willing as you are to make up for it. Sometimes the people who knock you down never turn once to look. With Elena's help, she climbed into the taxi with her packages, and Elena took $2 and a 15-cent piece from her pocketbook and handed them to the little lady, who clutched them tight in her tiny hand. All right, sweetheart, the taxi driver said, most patronizing term ever. Where do we go? The little lady chuckled. I'll tell you after we start, she said, and then to Elena, good luck to you, dearie. Watch out from now on how you go knocking people down. Goodbye, Elaine said. I am really very sorry. That's fine then, the little lady said, waving at her as the taxi pulled away from the curb. I'll be praying for you, dearie. Some old-fashioned terms in this bit. Well, Elena thought, staring after the taxi, there's one person anyway who will be praying for me. One person anyway. Okay. I love that. All the drama over like the family car and then that stuff with the old lady and dropping her food and things. It's good stuff. Okay. It was the first genuine day, shiny day of the summer, sorry, a time of year which brought Elena always to aching memories of her early childhood. When it had seemed to be summer all the time, she could not remember a winter before her father's death on a cold, wet day. She had taken to wondering lately during those swift counted years what had been done with all those wasted summer days. How could she have spent them so wantonly? I am foolish, she told herself early every summer. I am very foolish. I am grown up now and know the values of things. Nothing is ever really wasted, she believed sensibly, even one's childhood, I should say. And then each year, one summer morning, the warm wind would come down the city street where she walked, sorry, and she would be touched with little cold thought. I have let more time go by. Yet this morning, driving the little car which she and her sister owned together, apprehensive lest they might still realize that she had come after all and just taken it away, going docilely along the street, following the lines of traffic, stopping when she was bidden, and turning when she could. She smiled out at the sunlight slanting along the street and thought, I am going, I am going. I have finally taken the step. Always before, when she had her sister's permission to drive the little car, she had gone courteously, moving with extreme care to avoid even the slightest scratch or mar which might irritate her sister. But today, with her carton on the back seat and her suitcase on the floor, her gloves and pocketbook and light coat on the seat beside her, the car belonged entirely to her. A little contained would all a little contained world all of her own. I am really going, she thought. At the last traffic light in the city, before she turned to go onto the great highway out of town, she stopped, waiting, and slid Dr. Montague's letter out of her pocketbook. I will not even need a map, she thought. He must be a very careful man. Route 39 to Ashton, the letter said, and then turn left onto Route 5 going west. Follow this for a little less than 30 miles, and you will come to the small village of Hillsdale. Go through Hillsdale to the corner with a gas station on the left and a church on the right, and turn left here onto what seems to be a narrow country road. You will be going up into the hills, and the road is very poor. Follow this road to the end, about 6 miles, and you will come to the gates of Hill House. I am making these directions so detailed because it is advisable to stop in Hillsdale to ask your way. The people there are rude to strangers and openly hostile to anyone inquiring about Hill House. I am very happy that you will be joining us in Hill House, and will take great pleasure in making your acquaintance on Thursday, the 21st of June. The light changed, she turned onto the highway and was free of the city. No one, she thought, can catch me now. They don't even know which way I'm going. She had never driven far alone before. The notion of dividing her lovely journey into miles and hours was silly. She saw it, bringing her car with precision between the line on the road and the line of the trees beside the road. As a passage of moments, even each one knew, carrying her along with them, taking her down to a path of incredible novelty to a new place. The journey itself was her positive action, her destination, vague, unimagined, perhaps non-existent. She meant to savour each turn of her travelling, loving the road and the trees and the houses and the small ugly towns, teasing herself with the notion that she might take it into her head to stop just anywhere and never leave again. She might pull her car to the side of the highway, although that was not allowed. She told herself she would be punished if she really did, and leave it behind while she wandered off past the trees into the soft, welcoming country beyond. She might wander till she was exhausted, chasing butterflies or following a stream, and then come at nightfall to the hut of some poor woodcutter who would offer her shelter. She might make her home forever in East Barrington or Desmond or the incorporated village of Bark. She might never leave the road at all, but just hurry on and hurry on until the wheels of the car were worn to nothing. She had come to the end of the world. And she thought I might just go along to Hill House, where I am expected and where I am being given shelter and room and board and a small token salary in consideration of forsaking my commitments and involvements in the city and running away to see the world. I wonder what Dr. Montague is like. I wonder what Hill House is like. I wonder who else will be there. She was well away from the city now, watching for the turning onto Route 39, that magic thread of road Dr. Montague had chosen for her. Out of all the roads in the world to bring her safely to him and to Hill House. No other road could lead her from there. She was to where she wanted to be. Dr. Montague was confirmed more infallibly under the sign which had pointed the way to Route 39 was another sign saying Ashton 121 miles. The road, her intimate friend now, turned and dipped, going around turns where surprises waited. Once a cow, regarding her over a fence. Once an incurious dog down into the hollows where small towns lie, past fields and orchards. On the main street of one village she had passed a vast house, pillared and walled with shutters over the windows, and a pair of stone linens guiding the steps. That should be irons guiding the steps. And she thought that perhaps she might live there, dusting the irons each morning and patting their heads good night. Time is beginning this morning in June, she assured herself, but it is time that is strangely new, and of itself in these few seconds I have lived a lifetime in a house with two irons in front. Every morning I swept the porch and dusted the irons, and every evening I patted their heads good night, and once a week I washed their faces it's lions actually, and manes and paws with warm water and soda, and cleaned between their teeth with a swab. Inside the house, the rooms were tall and clean with shining floors and polished windows. A little dainty old lady took care of me, watching structurally with a silver tea service on the tray and bringing me a glass of elderberry wine each evening for my health's sake. I took my dinner alone in the long, quiet dining room at the gleaming table and between the tall windows. The white panelling of the walls shone in the candlelight. I dined upon a bird and radishes from the garden, and home-made plum jam. When I slept, it was under a crepe of white organdie, I think that is, and a nightlight guarded me from the hall. People bowed to me on the streets of the town because everyone was very proud of my lions when I died. She had left the town far behind by now and was going past dirty closed lunch stands and torn signs. There had been a fair somewhere near here once long ago with motorcycle races. The sign still carried fragments of words. Dare one of them read, and another evil, and she laughed at herself, perceiving how she sought out omens everywhere. The word is daredevil. Elena daredevil drivers, and they slowed her car because she was driving too fast and might reach Hill House too soon. At one spot she stopped altogether beside the road to stare in disbelief and wonder. Along the road for perhaps a quarter of a mile she had been passing and admiring a row of splendid tender Orlanders, blooming pink and white in a steady row. Now she had come to the gateway they protected, and past the gateway the trees continued. The gateway was no more than a pair of rained stone pillars, with a road leading away between them into empty fields. She could see the Orlander trees cut away from the road and ran up each side of a great square, and she could see all the way to the further side of the square, which was a little line of Orlander trees seemingly going along a little river. Inside the Orlander trees there was nothing, no house, no building, nothing but the straight road going across and the ending at the stream. Now what was there, she wondered? What was here and is gone, or what was going to be here and never came? Was it going to be a house, or a garden, or an orchard? Were they driven away forever, or were they coming back? Orlanders are poisonous, she remembered. Could they be here guarding something? Will I, she thought, will I get out of my car and go between the rained gates? And then once I am in the magic Orlander Square, and that I have wandered with a fairyland protected poisonously from the eyes of people passing. Once I have stepped between the magic gateposts, will I find myself through the protective barrier, the spell broken. I will go into a sweet garden with fountains and low benches and roses trained over arbors, and find one path jewelled perhaps with rubies and emeralds, soft enough for a king's daughter to walk upon with her little sandaled feet, and it will land me directly to the place which lies under a spell. I will walk up alone stone steps, past stone lions guarding, and into a courtyard where a fountain plays and the queen waits, weeping for the princess to return. She will drop her obediently when she sees me, and cry out to the palace servants, stirring at last after their long sleep, to prepare a great feast. because the enchantment is ended, and the palace is itself again, and we shall live happily ever after. No, of course, she thought, turning to start her car again. Once the palace becomes visible and the spell is broken, the whole spell will be broken, and all this countryside outside the Eorlanders will return to its proper form, fading away, towns and signs and cows into a soft green picture from a fairy tale. Then coming down from the hills there will be a prince riding bright in green and silver with 100 bowmen riding behind him, peanuts staring, horses tossing, jewels flashing. She laughed and turned to smile goodbye at the magic Orlanders. Another day, she told them, another day I'll come back and break your spell. She stopped for lunch after she had driven 100 miles and a mile. She found a country restaurant which advertised itself as an old mill and found herself startled incredibly upon a balcony over a dashing Sturkrum, looking down upon wet rocks and the intoxicating sparkle of moving water, with a cut glass bowl of cottage cheese on the table before her, and corn sticks in a napkin. Before this was a time and a land where enchantments were swiftly made and broken. She wanted to linger over her lunch, knowing that Hill House always waited for her at the end of her day. The only other people in the dining room were a family party, a mother and a father with a small boy and girl, and they talked to one another softly and gently. And once the little girl turned and regarded Elena with frank curiosity, after a minute smiled. The lights from the stream below touched the ceiling and the polished tables, and glanced along the little girl's curls, and the little girl's mother said, "She wants her cup of stars." Elena looked up, surprised. The little girl was sliding back in her chair, sullenly refusing her milk, while her father frowned and her brother giggled, and her mother said calmly, "She wants her cup of stars." Indeed, yes, Elena thought. Indeed, so do I. A cup of stars, of course. Her little cup, the mother was explaining, smiling apologetically at the waitress, who was thunderstruck at the thought that the mill's good country milk was not rich enough for the little girl. It has stars in the bottom, and she always drinks her milk from it at home. She calls it her cup of stars because she can see the stars while she drinks her milk. The waitress nodded, unconvinced, and the mother told the little girl, you'll have your milk from your cup of stars tonight when we get home. But just for now, just to be a very good little girl, will you take a little milk from this glass?" "Don't do it," Elena told the little girl. "Insist on your cup of stars. Once they have trapped you into being like everyone else, you will never see your cup of stars again. Don't do it." And the little girl glanced at her and smiled a little subtle dimpling, wholly comprehending smile, and shook her head stubbornly at the glass. Brave girl, Elena thought. Wise, brave girl. "You're spoiling her," the father said. "She ought not to be allowed these whims." Just this once, the mother said. She put down the glass of milk and touched the little girl gently on the hand. Eat your ice cream, she said. When they left, the little girl waved goodbye to Elena, and Elena waved back, sitting in joyful loneliness to finish her coffee while the gay stream tumbled along below her. I have not very much further to go, Elena thought. I am more than halfway there. Journey's end, she thought, and far back in her mind, sparkling like the little stream, a tag end of a tune danced through her head, bringing distinctly a word or so. In delay there lies no plenty, she thought. In delay there lies no plenty. She nearly stopped forever just outside Ashton, because she came to a tiny cottage buried in a garden. I could live there all alone, she thought. Slowly slowing the car to look down the winding garden path to the small blue front door, with perfectly a white cat on the steep step. No one would ever find me there, either behind all these roses, and just to make sure I would plant oleanders by the road. I was light a fire in the cool evenings, and toast apples at their own heath. I will raise white cats, raise white cats, and sew white curtains for widows, and sometimes come and sometimes come out my door to go to the store to buy cinnamon and tea and thread. People will come to me to have their fortunes told, and I will brew love potions for sad maidens. I will have a robin. But the cottage was far behind, and it was time to look for her new road, so carefully charted by Dr. Montague. Turn left onto Route 5, going west, his letter said, and efficiently and promptly, as though he had been guiding her from some spot far away, moving her car with controls in her hands. It was done. She was on Route 5 going west, and her journey was nearly done. In spite of what he said, though, she thought, I will stop in Hillsdale for a minute, just for a cup of coffee, because I cannot bear to have my long trip end so soon. It was not really disobeying anyway. The letter said it was inadvisable to stop in Hillsdale to ask the way, not forbidden to stop for a coffee, and perhaps if I don't mention Hill House, I will not be doing wrong. Anyway, she thought obscurely, it's my last chance. Hillsdale was upon her before she knew it. A tangled, disorderly mess of dirty houses and crooked streets. It was small. Once she had come onto the main street, she could see the corner at the end with the gas station and the church. There seemed to be only one place to stop for coffee, and that was an unattractive diner, but Elena bound to stop in Hillsdale, and so she brought her car to the broken curb in front of the diner and got out. After a minute's thought, with a silent nod to Hillsdale, she locked the car, mindful of her suitcase on the floor and the carton on the back seat. I will not spend long in Hillsdale, she thought, looking up and down the street, which managed even in the sunlight to be dark and ugly. A dog slept uneasily in the shade against a wall. A woman stood in a doorway across the street and looked at Elena, and the two young boys lounged against a fence, elaborately silent. Elena, who was afraid of strange dogs and jeering women and young hoodlums, went quickly into the diner, clutching her pocketbook and her car keys. Inside, she found a counter with a chinless, tired girl behind it and a man sitting at the end eating. She wondered briefly how hungry she must have been to come in here at all when she looked at the grey counter and smeared glass bowl over a plate of donuts. Coffee, she said to the girl behind the counter, and the girl turned wearily and tumbled down a cup from the piles on the shelves. I will have to drink this coffee because I said I was going to, Elena told herself sternly. But next time I will listen to Dr. Montague. There was some elaborate joke going on between the man eating and the girl behind the counter. When she sat Elena's coffee down, she glanced at her and half smiled, and he shrugged, and then the girl laughed. Elena looked up, but the girl was examining her fingernails, and the man was wiping his plate with bread. Perhaps Elena's coffee was poisoned. It certainly looked it. Determined to plumb the village of Hillsdale to the lowest depths, Elena said to the girl, "I'll have one of those donuts two, please." And the girl glancing sideways at the man said, "One of the donuts onto a dish." Slid one of the donuts onto a dish and sat it down in front of Elena and laughed when she caught another look from the man. This is a pretty little town," Elena said to the girl. "What is it called?" The girl stared at her. Perhaps no one had ever before had the audacity to call Hillsdale a pretty little town. After a moment, the girl looked again at the man, as though calling for confirmation, and said, "Hillsdale." "Have you lived here long?" Elena said. "I'm not going to mention Hill House," she assured Dr. Montague far away. "I just wanted to waste a little time." "Yeah," the girl said. "It must be pleasant living in a small town like this. I came from the city." "Yeah." "Do you like it here?" "It's all right," the girl said. She looked again at the man who was listening carefully. "Not much to do." "How large a town is it?" "Pretty small. You want more coffee?" This was addressed to the man who was rattling his cup against his saucer, and Elena took a first shuddering sip of her own coffee and wondered how she could possibly want more. "Do you have a lot of visitors around here?" she asked, when the girl had filled the coffee cup and gone back to lounge against the shelves. "Tourists, I mean." "What for?" For a minute the girl flashed at her from what might have been an emptiness greater than Elena had ever known. "Why would anybody come here?" She looked sullenly at the man and added, "There's not even a movie." "But the hills are so pretty. Mostly with small out-of-the-way towns like this, you'll find city people who have come and built themselves homes up in the hills, for privacy." The girl laughed shortly. "Not here, they don't. Or remodeling old houses." "Privacy," the girl said, and laughed again. "It just seems surprising," Elena said, feeling the man looking at her. Yeah, the girl said. If they'd put in a movie, even. I thought, Elena said carefully, then I might even look around. Old houses are normally cheap, and it's fun to make them over. Not around here, the girl said. Then Elena said, there are no old houses around here. Back in the hills. No. The man rose, taking change from his pocket, and spoke for the first time. People leave this town, he said. They don't come here. When the door closed behind him and the girl turned her flat eyes back to Elena, almost resentfully, as though Elena, with her chatter, had driven the man away. He was right, she said finally. They go away, the lucky ones. Why don't you run away? Elena asked her, and the girl shrugged. Would I have been any better off? She asked. She took Elena's money without interest and returned the change. Then, with another of her quick flashes, she glanced at the empty plates at the end of the counter and almost smiled. He comes in every day, she said. When Elena smiled back and started to speak, the girl turned her back and busied herself with the cups on the shelves, and Elena, feeling herself dismissed, rose gratefully from her coffee and took up her car keys and pocketbook. Goodbye, Elena said, and the girl back still turned and said goodbye. Sorry, good luck to you. I hope you find your house. Okay, just take a short break. Finish my coffee off. Speaking of coffee. So I really like this part of the novel. I really like just her imagination running wild as she's going down this road, and how it just feels like a real journey, and just the mystery it's building up about Hill House, the mystique around the place, and just like the descriptions of that town she stopped in. So it's really good stuff. Okay. The road leading away from the gas station and the church was very poor indeed, deeply rutted and rocky. Elena's little car stumbled and bounced, reluctant to go further into these unattractive hills, where the day seemed quickly drawing to an end under the thick, oppressive trees on either side. They do not really seem to have much traffic on the road, Elena thought warily, turning the wheel quickly to avoid a particularly vicious rock ahead. 6 miles of this will not do the car any good, and for the first time in hours she thought of her sister and laughed. But now they would surely know that she had taken the car and gone, but they would not know where. They would be telling each other incredulously than they would never have suspected it of Elena. I would never have suspected it myself, she thought, laughing still. Everything is different. I am a new person, very far from home. In delay there lies no plenty. Present mirth hath present laughter. And she gasped as the car cracked against a rock and reeled back across the road with an ominous scraping somewhere beneath, but then gathered itself together valiantly and resumed its dogged climb. The tree branches brushed against the windshield, and it grew steadily darker. Hill House likes to make an entrance, she thought. I wonder if the sun ever shines along here. At last, with one final effort, the car cleared a tangle of dead leaves and small branches across the road and came into a clearing by the gate of Hill House. Why am I here? She thought helplessly, and at once, why am I here? The gate was tall, with an ominous and heavy set strongly into a stone wall which went off through the trees. Even from the car she could see the padlock and the chain that was twisted around and through the bars. Beyond the gate she could see only that the road continued, turned shadowed on either side by the still dark trees. Since the gate was so clearly locked and double locked and chained and barred, who, she wondered, wants so badly to get in? She made no attempt to get out of her car, but pressed the horn, and the trees and the gate shuddered and withdrew slightly from the sound. After a minute she blew the horn again, and then saw a man coming towards her from inside the gate. He was as dark and unwelcoming as the padlock, and before he moved towards the gate he peered through the bars at her, scowling. What you want? His voice was sharp, mean. I want to come in, please. Please unlock the gate. Who say? Why? She faltered. I'm supposed to come in, she said at last. What for? I am expected. Or am I? She wondered suddenly. Is this as far as I go? Who by? She knew, of course, that he was delighting in exceeding his authority, as though once he moved to unlock the gate, he would lose the little temporary superiority he thought he had. And what superiority have I? She wondered. I am outside the gate, after all. She could already see that losing her temper, which she did rarely because she was afraid of being ineffectual, would only turn him away, leaving her still outside the gate, railing frequently. Pardon me. She could even anticipate his innocence if he were reproved later for this arrogance. The malicious, vacant grin, the wide black eyes, the whining voice protesting that he would have let her in. He planned to let her in, but how could he be sure? He had his orders, didn't he? And he had to do what he was told. He'd been the one to get in trouble, wouldn't he? If he let in someone wouldn't supposed to be inside. She could anticipate his shrug and picturing him laughing, perhaps the worst thing she could have done. Eyeing her up, he moved back from the gate. You better come back later, he said, and turned his back with an air of virtuous triumph. Listen, she called after him, still trying not to sound angry. I am one of Dr. Montague's guests. He will be expecting me in the house. Please listen to me. He turned and grinned at her. They couldn't rightly be expecting you, he said, seeing as you're the only ones come so far. Do you mean that there's no one else in the house? No one I know of. Maybe my wife getting it fixed up. So they shouldn't be there exactly expecting you. Now, could they? She sat back against the car seat and closed her eyes. Hill House, she thought. You're as hard to get into as heaven. I suppose you know what you're asking for. Come in here. I suppose they told you back in the city you bear anything about this place. I heard that. I was invited here as a guest of Dr. Montague's. When you open the gates, I will go inside. I'll open them. I'm going to open them. I just want to be sure you know what's waiting for you in there. You ever been in here before? One of the family, maybe. He looked at her now, peering through the bars, his jeering face once more barrier after padlock and chain. I can't let you in till I am sure, can I? What you say your name was? She sighed. Elena Vance. Not one of the family then, I guess. You ever hear anything about this place? It's my chance, I suppose, she thought. I'm being given a last chance. I could turn my car around right here and now in front of these gates, go away from here, and no one would blame me. Anyone has the right to run away. She put her head through the car window and said with fury, My name is Elena Vance. I am expected in Hill House. Unlock these gates at once. All right, deliberately making a wholly unnecessary display of fitting the key and turning it. He opened the padlock and loosened the chain and swung the gates just wide enough for the car to come through. Elena moved the car slowly, but the electricity with which she leaped to the side of the road made her think for a moment that he had perceived the fleeting impulse crossing her mind. She laughed and then stopped the car because he was coming towards her safely from the side. You won't like it, he said. You'll be sorry I ever opened that gate. Out of the way, please, she said. You've held me up long enough. You think they could get anyone else to open this gate? You think anyone else stay around here that long except me and my wife? You think we can't have things just about the way we want them, long as we stay around here and fix up a house and open the gates for all the city people think you know everything. Please get away from the car. She dared not to admit to herself that he frightened her, for fear that he might perceive it. His nearness, leaning against the side of the car, was ugly, and his ominous resentment puzzled her. She had certainly made him open the gate for her, but did he think of the house and the garden as his own? A name from Dr. Montague's letter came into her mind, and she asked curiously, "Are you Dudley, the caretaker?" The caretaker. "Yes, I'm Dudley, the caretaker." He mimicked her. "Who else you think would be around here?" "The honest old family retainer," she thought, "proud and loyal and thoroughly unpleasant. You and your wife take care of the house all alone." Who else? It was his boast, his cause, his refrain. She moved relentlessly, unafraid to draw away from him too obviously, and let want him with small motions of starting the car to make him stand aside. "I'm sure you'll be able to make us very comfortable, you and your wife," she said, putting a tone of finality into her voice. "Meanwhile, I'm very anxious to get to the house as soon as possible." He snickered disagreeably. "Me now," he said. "Me, I don't hang around here after dark." Grinning satisfied with himself, he stood away from the car, and Elena was grateful, although awkward. Starting the car under his eye, "Perhaps he will keep popping out at me all along the drive," she thought, a sneering Cheshire cat yelling each time that I should be happy to find anyone willing to hang around this place until dark anyway. To show that she was not at all affected by the thought of the face of Dudley the caretaker between the trees, she began to whistle, a little annoyed to find that the same tune still ran through her head. Present mirth, half present laughter, and she told herself crossly that she must really make an effort to think of something else. She was sure that the rest of the words must be most unsuitable to hide so stubbornly from her memory, and probably wholly disreputable to the court singing on her arrival at Hill House. Over the trees, occasionally between them and the hills, she caught glimpses of what might be the roofs, perhaps a tower of Hill House. They made houses so oddly back when Hill House was built. She thought they put towers and turrets and buttress and wooden lance on them, even sometimes Gothic spirals and gargoyles. Nothing was ever left undecorated. Perhaps Hill House has a tower or a secret chamber or even a passageway going off into the hills, and probably used by smugglers, although what could smugglers find to smuggle around these lonely hills? Perhaps I will encounter a devilish handsome smuggler, and she turned her car onto the last stretch of the straight drive, landing her directly face to face to Hill House, and moving without thought, pressed her foot on the brake to stall the car and sat staring. The house was vile. She shivered and thought the words coming freely into her mind. Hill House is vile. It is diseased. Get away from here at once. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. So I will take a short break. Chapter 2 is shorter. So there's a nice little blurb by Stephen King on the back. Probably not surprisingly. Okay. Chapter 2. No human. Hello, Cindy. How are you? That's good timing since I'm starting chapter 2. I'm okay, thanks. Thanks for stopping by. This is the first time read for me, Cindy, of this book. Have you read it? You're quite a well-read person, Cindy. I could imagine you've read this. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, I'm definitely enjoying it so far. I'm thinking of maybe reading a bit more on election night. So later in the week. Okay, I'll start the next chapter. No human eye can isolate the unhappy coincidence of line and place which suggest evil in the face of a house, and yet somehow a mechanic juxtaposition, a badly turned angle, some chance meeting of roof and sky, turned Hill House into a place of despair. More frighteningly because the face of Hill House seemed awake, and with a watchfulness from the blank windows and a touch of glee in the eyebrow of a cornice. Almost any house, caught unexpectedly or at an odd angle, can turn a deeply humorous look on a watching person, either a mischievous little chimley or a doorman like a dimple, can catch up a beholder with a sense of fellowship. But a house arrogant and hating, never of guard can any be evil. This house, which seemed somehow to have formed itself, flying together into its own powerful pattern under the hands of the building, fitting itself into its own construction of lines and angles, reared its great head back against the sky without concession to humanity. It was a house without kindness, never meant to be lived in, not a fit place for people or for love or for hope. Exorcism cannot alter the containance of a house. Hill House would stay as it was until it was destroyed. I should have turned back at the gate, Elena thought. The house had caught her with a archivistic turn in the pit of the stomach, and she looked along the lines of its roofs, faint, faintly endeavouring to locate the badness. Whatever dwelt there, her hands turned nervously cold so she fumbled trying to take out a cigarette, and beyond everything else she was afraid, listening to the sick voice inside her which whispered, "Get away from here, get away." But this is what I came so far to find, she told herself. I can't go back. Besides, he would laugh at me if I tried to get back out through the gate. Trying not to look up at the house, she could not even have told its colour or its style or its size, except that it was ominous and dark. Looking down over her, she started the car again and drove up the last bit of the driveway directly to the steps, which led in a forthright, no escape manner onto the veranda and aimed at the front door. The drive turned off on either side to encircle the house, and probably later she would take her car around and find a building of some kind to put it in. Now she felt uneasily that she did not care to cut off her means of departure too completely. She turned the car just enough to move off to one side, out of the way, out of later arrivals. It would be pity, she thought grimly, for anyone to get a first look at this house with anything so confronting as a human automobile parked in front of it, and got out, taking her suitcase and her coat. Well, she thought inadequately, here I am. It was an act of moral strength to lift her foot and set it on the bottom step, and she thought that her deep unwillingness to touch Hill House for the first time came directly from the vivid feeling that it was waiting for her, evil but patient. Journeys end in lovers' meeting, she thought, remembering her song at last, and laughed, standing on the steps of Hill House. Journeys end in lovers' meetings, and she put her feet down firmly and went up the veranda and the door. Hill House came around her in a rush. She was enshadowed, and the sound of her feet on the wood of the veranda was an outrage in the utter silence, as though it had been a very long time since feet stamped against the boards of Hill House. She brought her hand up to the heavy iron knocker that had a child's face, determined to make more noise and yet more, and so that Hill House might be very sure that she was there. And then the door opened without warning, and she was looking at the woman who, if like ever merited like, could only be the wife of the man at the gate. Mrs. Dudley, she said, catching her breath, I'm Elena Vance. I'm expected. Silently, the woman stood aside. Her apron was clean, her hair was neat, and yet she gave an indefinable air of directness, quite in keeping with her husband, and the suspicious sourness of her face was a match for the malicious perturbations of this. Now Elena told herself it was partly because everything seemed so dark around here, and partly because I expected that man's wife to be ugly. Even if I hadn't seen Hill House, I would be would I be so unfair to these people? They only take care of it, not after all. The hall in which they stood was overfull of dark wood and weighty carving, dim under the heaviness of the staircase, which lay back from the further end. Above there seemed to be another hallway, going the width of the house. She could see a wide landing, and then across the staircase perhaps doors closed along the upper hall. On either side of her now were great double doors carved with fruit and grain and living things. All the doors she could see in this house were closed. When she tried to speak, her voice drowned in the dim stillness, and she had to try again to make a sound. Can you take me to my room? She asked at last, gesturing towards her suitcase on the floor and watching the wavering reflection of her hand going down and down into the deep darkness of the polished floor. I gather I'm the first one here. You did say you were Mrs. Dudley. I think I'm going to cry, she thought, like a child sobbing and wailing. I don't like it here. Mrs. Dudley turned and started up the stairs, and Elena took up her suitcase and followed, only after anything else alive in this house. No, she thought, I don't like it here. Mrs. Dudley came to the top of the stairs and turned right, and Elena saw that with some rare perception that buildings of the house had given up any attempt at style. Builders at the house, sorry, had given up any attempt at style, probably after realizing what the house was going to be. Whether they chose it or not, and had on this second floor set in a long straight hall to accommodate the doors to the bedrooms. She had a quick impression of the builders finishing off the second and third stories of the house with a kind of indecent haste, eager to finish their work without embellishment and get out of there following the simplest possible pattern for the rooms. At the left end of the hall there was a second staircase, probably going from servants' rooms on the third floor down past the second to the service rooms below. At the right end of the hall another room had been set in, perhaps since it was the end, to get the maximum amount of sun and light, except for continuation of the dark woodwork and what looked like a series of poorly executed engravings arranged with unlovely exactness along the hall in either direction. Nothing broke the straightness of the hall except the series of doors, all closed. Mrs. Dudley crossed the hall and opened a door, perhaps at random. This is the blue room, she said. From the turn in the staircase, Elena assumed that the room would be at the front of the house. Sister Anne, she thought, and moved gratefully towards the light from the room. How nice, she said, standing in the doorway, but only from the sense that she must say something. It was not nice at all, and only barely tolerable. It had enclosed the same clashing disharmony that marked Hill House throughout. Mrs. Dudley turned aside to let Elena come in, and spoke apparently to the wall. I set dinner on the dining room sideboard at 6 sharp, she said. You can serve yourselves. I clear up in the morning. I have breakfast ready for you at 9. That's the way I agreed to do. I can't keep the rooms up the way you like, but there's no one else you could get that would help me. I can't wait on people. What I agreed to, it doesn't mean I wait on people. Elena nodded, standing uncertainly in the doorway. I don't stay after I set out dinner, Mrs. Dudley went on. Not after it begins to get dark. I leave before dark comes. I know, Elena said. We live over in the town 6 miles away. Yes, Elena said, remembering Hillsdale. So there won't be anyone around if you need help. I understand. We couldn't even hear you in the night, I don't suppose. No one could. No one lives any nearer than the town. No one else will come any nearer than that. I know, Elena said tiredly. In the night, Mrs. Dudley said, and smiled outright. In the dark, she said, and closed the door behind her. Elena almost giggled, thinking of herself calling, "Oh, Mrs. Dudley, I need your help in the dark," and then she shivered. She stood alone beside her suitcase, her coat still hanging over her arm, thoroughly miserable, telling herself helplessly, journey's end in lovers' meeting, and wishing she could go home. Behind her lay the dark suitcase and the polished hallway and the great front door, and Mrs. Dudley and Dudley laughing at the gate and the padlocks, and Hillsdale and the cottage of flowers and the family at the inn and the Orlando garden and the house with the stone lions in front, and they had brought her under Dr. Montague's unerring eye to the blue room at Hill House. It's awful, she thought, unwilling to move, since motion might imply acceptance, a gesture of moving in. It's awful, and I don't want to stay, but there was nowhere else to go. Dr. Montague's letter had brought her this far, and could take her no further. After a minute she sighed and took her head and walked across to her suitcase to set her suitcase down on the bed. "Here I am in the blue room of Hill House," she said half aloud, although it was real enough and beyond all question a blue room. There were blue dimly curtains over the two windows, which looked out over the roof of the veranda onto the lawn, and a blue figured rug on the floor, and a blue spread on the bed, and a blue quilt at the foot. The walls, dark woodwork to shoulder height, were blue figured paper above with a design of tiny blue flowers, ralphed and gathered and delicate. Perhaps someone had once hoped to lighten the air of the blue room in Hill House with a dainty wallpaper, not seeing how such a hope would evaporate in Hill House, leaving only the faintest hint of its existence, like an almost inaudible echo of sobbing far away. Elena shook herself, turning to see the room complete. It had an unbelievably faint design, which left it chillingly wrong in all its dimensions, so that the walls seemed always in one direction, a fraction longer than the eye could endure, and in another direction a fraction less than the barest possible tolerable length. This is where they want me to sleep, Elena thought incredulously. What nightmares are waiting, shadowed in these high corners? What breath of mindless fear will drift across my mouth? And shook herself again. Really, she told herself. Really, Elena. She opened her suitcase on the high bed and, slipping off her stiff city shoes with grateful relief, began to unpack at the back of her mind the thoroughly female conviction that the best way to soothe a troubled mind is to put on the comfortable shoes. Yesterday, packing her suitcase in the city, she had chosen clothes which she assumed would be suitable for wearing in an isolated country house. She had even run out at the last minute and bought, excited at her own daring, 2 pairs of slacks, something she had not worn in more years than she could remember. Mother would be furious, she had thought, packing the slacks down at the bottom of the suitcase so that she need not take them out, need never let anyone know she had them, in case she lost her courage. Now in Hill House they no longer seemed so new. She unpacked carelessly, setting dresses crooked on hangers, tossing the slacks into the bottom drawer of the high marble-topped dresser, throwing her city shoes into a corner of the great wardrobe. She was bored already with the books she had brought. I am probably not going to stay anyway, she thought, and closed her empty suitcase and sat it in the wardrobe corner. It won't take me 5 minutes to pack again. She discovered that she had been trying to put her suitcase down without making a sound, and then realized that while she unpacked, she had been in her stocking feet, trying to move as silently as possible. And though stillness was vital in Hill House, she remembered that Mrs. Dudley had also walked without sound. When she stood in the middle of the room, the passing silence of Hill House came back all around her. I am like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster, she thought, and the monster feels my tiny little movements inside. No, she said aloud, and the one word echoed. She went quickly across the room and pushed aside the blue dimly curtains, but the sunlight came only palely through the thick glass of the windows, and she could see only the roof of the veranda and a stretch of the lawn beyond. Somewhere down there was a little car which could take her away again. Journeys end in lovers' meeting, she thought. It was my own choice to come. Then she realized that she was afraid to go back across the room. She was standing with her back to the window, looking from the door to the wardrobe to the dresser to the bed, telling herself that she was not afraid at all. When she heard far below the sounds of a car door slamming, and then quick footsteps almost dancing up the steps and across the veranda, and then shockingly the crash of a great iron knocker coming down. Why, she thought, there are other people coming. I am not going to be here all alone. Almost laughing, she ran across the room and into the hall to look down the staircase into the hallway below. Thank heavens you're here. Thank heaven you're here, she said, peering through the dimness. Thank heaven somebody's here. She realized without surprise that she was speaking as though Mrs. Dudley could not hear her, although Mrs. Dudley stood straight and pale in the hall. Come on up, Elena said. You'll have to carry your own suitcase. She was breathless and seemed unable to stop talking. Her usual shyness melted away by relief. My name's Elena Vance, she said, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm Theodora, just Theodora. This bloody house. It's just as bad up here. Come on up. Make her give you the room next to mine. Theodora came up the heavy stairway after Mrs. Dudley, looking incredulously at the stained glass window on the landing, the marble urn in a niche, the patterned carpet. Her suitcase was considerably larger than Elena's, and considerably more luxurious, and Elena came forward to help her, glad that her own things were safely put away out of sight. Wait till you see the bedrooms, Elena said. Mine used to be the embalming room, I think. It's the home I've always dreamed of, Theodora said. A little hideaway where I can be alone with my thoughts, particularly if my thoughts happen to be about murder or suicide or green room, Mrs. Dudley said coldly, and Elena sensed with a quick turn of apprehension that flippant or critical talk about the house bothered Mrs. Dudley in the same manner. Maybe she thinks it can hear us, Elena thought, and then was so sorry that she had thought it. Perhaps she shivered because Theodora turned with a quick smile and touched her shoulder gently, reassuringly. She is charming, Elena thought, smiling back, not at all the sort of person who belongs in this dreary, dark place. But then probably I don't belong here either. I am not the sort of person for Hill House, but I can't think of anybody who would be. She laughed, then watching Theodora's expression as she stood in the hallway of the green room. Good Lord, Theodora said, looking sideways at Elena. How perfectly enchanting. A positive bower. I set dinner on the dining room sideboard at 6 sharp, Mrs. Dudley said. You can serve yourselves. I clear up. In the morning I have breakfast ready for you at 9. That's the way I agreed to do. You're frightened, Theodora said, watching Elena. I can't keep the rooms up the way you'd like, but there's no one else you could get that would help me. I don't wait on people. What I agree to, it doesn't mean I wait on people. It was just when I thought I was all alone, Elena said. I don't stay after 6, not after it begins to get dark. I'm here now, Theodore said, so it's all right. We have a connecting bedroom, Elena said absurdly. The rooms are exactly alike. Green, dimly curtains hung over the windows in Theodora's room. The wallpaper was decked with green garlands, and the bedspread and quilt were green. The marble toppled dresser and the huge wardrobe were the same. I've never seen such awful places in my life, Elena said, her voice raising. Like the very best hotels, Theodora said, or any good girls' camp. I leave before dark comes, Mrs. Dudley went on. No one can hear you if you scream in the night, Elena told Theodora. She realized that she was clutching at the doorknob, and under Theodora's quizzical eye, unclenched her fingers and walked steadily across the room. We'll have to find some way of opening these windows, she said. So there won't be anyone around if you need help, Mrs. Dudley said. We couldn't hear you, even in the night. No one could. All right now, Theodora asked, and Elena nodded. No one lives any nearer than the town. No one else will come any nearer than that. You're probably just hungry, Theodora said, and I'm starved myself. She set her suitcase on the bed and slipped off her shoes. Nothing, she said, upsets me more than being hungry. I snarl and snarp and burst into tears. She lifted a pair of softly tailored slacks out of the suitcase. In the night, Mrs. Dudley said. She smiled. In the dark, she said, and closed the door behind her. After a minute, Elena said, she also walks without making a sound. Delightful old body, Theodora turned, regarding her room. I take it back that about the best hotel, she said. It's a little bit like a boarding school I went to for a while. Come and see mine, Elena said. She opened the bathroom door and led the way into the blue room. I was all unpacked and thinking about packing again when you came. Poor baby, you're currently starving. You're certainly starving, sorry. All I could think of when I got a look at the place from outside was what fun it would be to stand out there and watch it burn down, maybe before we leave. It was terrible being here alone. You should have seen that boarding school of mine during vacations. Theodora went back into her own room, and with a sense of movement and sound in the two rooms, Elena felt more cheerful. She straightened her clothes on the hangers in the wardrobe and set her books evenly on the bed table. Pardon me. You know, Theodora called from the other room. It is kind of like the first day at school. Everything's ugly and strange, and you don't know anybody, and you're afraid everyone's going to laugh at your clothes. Elena, who had opened the dresser drawer to take out a pair of slacks, stopped and then laughed, and threw the slacks on the bed. Did I understand correctly, Theodora went on, that Mrs. Dudley is not going to come if we scream in the night? It was not what she agreed to. Did you meet the amiable old retainer at the gate? We had a lovely chat. He and I couldn't come in, and I said I could, and then I tried to run him down with my car, but he jumped. Look, do you think we have to sit around here in our rooms and wait? I'd like to change into something comfortable. Unless we dress for dinner, do you think? I won't if you won't. I won't if you won't. They can't fight both of us. Anyway, let's get out of here and go exploring. I would very much like to get this roof off from over my head. It gets dark so early in these hills with all the trees. Elena went to the window again, but there was still sunlight slanting across the lawn. It won't be really dark for nearly an hour. I want to go outside and roll on the grass. Elena chose a red sweater, thinking that in this room, in this house, the red of the sweater and the red of the sandals bought to match it would almost certainly be utterly at war with each other, although they had been close enough yesterday in the city. Serves me right anyway, she thought, for wanting to wear such things. I never did before, but she looked oddly well, it seemed to her, as she stood by the long mirror on the wardrobe door, almost comfortably. Do you have any idea who else is coming? She asked. Or when? Dr. Montague, Theodora said. I thought he'd be here before anyone else. Have you known Dr. Montague long? Never met him, Theodora said. Have you? Never. You almost ready? All ready. Theodora came through the bathroom door into Elena's room. She is lovely. Elena thought, turning to look. I wish I were lovely. Theodora was wearing a vivid yellow shirt, and Elena laughed and said, You bring more light into the room than the window. Theodora came over and regarded herself reprovingly in Elena's mirror. I feel, she said, that in this dreary place it is our duty to look as bright as possible. I approve of your red sweater. The two of us will be visible from one end of Hill House to the other. Still looking into the mirror, she asked, I suppose Dr. Montague wrote to you? Yes, Elena was embarrassed. I didn't know at first whether it was a joke or not, but my brother-in-law checked up on him. You know, Theodora said slowly, up until the last minute when I got to the gates, I guess I never really thought there would be a Hill House. You don't go around expecting things like this to happen. But some of us go around hoping, Elena said. Theodora laughed and swung around before the mirror and caught Elena's hand. Feather babe in the woods, she said. Let's go exploring. We can't go far away from the house. I promise not to go one step further than you say. Do you think we have to check in and out with Mrs. Dudley? She probably watches every move we make anyway. It's probably part of what she agreed to. Agreed to with whom, I wonder? Count Dracula? You think he lives in Hill House? I think he spends all his weekends here. I swear I saw bats in the woodwork downstairs. Follow, follow. They ran downstairs, moving with colour and life against the dark woodwork and the clouded light of the stairs, their feet clattering, and Mrs. Dudley stood below and watched them in silence. We're going exploring, Mrs. Dudley, Theodora said lightly. We'll be outside somewhere, but we'll be back soon, Elena added. I set dinner down on the sideboard at 6 o'clock, Mrs. Dudley explained. Elena, tugging, got the great front door open. It was just as heavy as it looked, and she thought, we will really have to find some easier way to get back in. Leave this open, she said, over her shoulder to Theodora. It's terribly heavy. Get one of these big vases and prop it open. Theodora wheeled one of the big stone vases from the corner of the hall and stood it in the doorway and rested the door against it. The fading sunlight outside was bright after the darkness of the house, and the air was fresh and sweet. Behind them, Mrs. Dudley moved the vase again, and the big door slammed shut. Lovable old thing, Theodora said to the closed door. For a moment her face was thin with anger, and Elena thought, I hope she never looks at me like that, and was surprised, remembering she was always shy with strangers, awkward and timid, and yet had come in no more than half an hour to think of Theodora as close and vital, someone whose anger would be frightening. I think Elena said hesitantly and relaxed, because when she spoke, Theodora turned and smiled again. I think that during the daylight hours when Mrs. Dudley is around, I shall find myself some absorbing occupation far, far from the house. Rolling the court perhaps, or treading the grapes in the Hoff house. Perhaps you could help Dudley with the gates, or look for nameless graves in the nettle patch. They were standing by the rail of the veranda. From there they could see down the drive to the point where it turned among the trees again, and down over the soft curve of the hills to the distant small line which might have been the main highway, the road back to the cities from which they had come. Except for the wires which ran to the house from a spot among the trees, there was no evidence that Hill House belonged in any way to the rest of the world. Elena turned and followed the veranda. It went apparently all around the house. "Oh, look," she said, turning the corner. Behind the house the hills were piled in great pressing masses flooded with summer green now, rich and still. "It's why they called it Hill House," Elena said inadequately. "It's altogether Victorian," Theodora said. "They simply wallowed in this kind of great billowing overdone sort of thing, and buried themselves in folds of velvet and tussles and purple plush. Anyone before them or after would have put this house right up there on top of those hills, where it belongs, instead of snaggling it down here. If it were on top of the hill anyone could see it. I vote for keeping it well hidden where it is. All the time I'm here I'm going to be terrified," Theodore said, "thinking of one of these hills will fall on us." "They don't fall on you, they just slide down, silently and secretly, rolling over you while you try to run away." "Thank you," Theodore said in a small voice. "What Mrs. Dudley has started you have completed nicely. I shall pack and go home at once." Believing her for a minute, Elena turned and stared, and then saw the amusement on her face and thought, "She's much braver than I am." Unexpectedly, although it was later to become a familiar note, a recognizable attribute of what was to mean Theodora in Elena's mind, Theodora caught at Elena's thought and answered her. "Don't be so afraid all the time," she said, and reached out to touch Elena's cheek with one finger. "We never know where our courage is coming from." Then quickly she ran down the steps and out onto the lawn between the tall grouped trees. "Hurry," she called back. "I want to see if there's a brook somewhere." "We can't go too far," Elena said, following. Like two children they ran across the grass, both welcoming the sudden openness of clear spaces after even a little time in Hill House, their feet grateful for the grass after the solid floors. With an instinct almost animal, they followed the sound and the smell of water. "Over here," Theodora said, "a little path." It led them tantalizingly closer to the sound of the water. doubling back and forth through the trees, giving them occasional glimpses down the hill to the driveway, leading them around out of sight of the house, across a rocky meadow, and always downhill. As they came away from the house and out of the trees to the places where the sunlight could still find them, Elena was easier, although she could see that the sun was dropping disturbingly closer to the heaped hills. She called to Theodora, but Theodora only called back, "Follow, follow," and ran down the path. Suddenly she stopped, breathless and tottering on the very edge of the brook, which had leaped up before her almost without warning. Elena, coming more slowly behind, caught at her hand and held her back, and then laughing, they fell together against the bank which sloped sharply down to the brook. "They like to surprise you around here," Theodora said, gasping. "Serves you right if you went diving in," Elena said, "running like that. It's pretty, isn't it?" The water of the brook moved quickly in little lightened ripples. On the other side the grass grew down to the edge of the water, and the yellow and blue flowers leaned their heads over. There was a rounded soft hill there, and perhaps more meadow beyond, and far away the great hills still catching the light of the sun. "It's pretty," Theodora said with finality. "I'm sure I've been here before," Elena said, "in a book of fairy tales, and perhaps. I'm sure of it. Can you skip rocks? This is where the princess came to meet the magic golden fish who is really a prince in disguise. He couldn't draw much water. That golden fish of yours, it can't be more than 3 inches deep. There are stepping stones to go across, and little fish swimming. They want tiny ones minors. Princes in disguise, all of them." Theodora stretched in the sun on the bank and yawned. "Tadpoles," she suggested. "Minors. It's too late for tadpoles, silly, but I bet we can find frogs' eggs. I used to catch minors in my hands and let them go. What a farmer's wife you might have made. This is a place for picnics, with lunch beside the brook and hard-boiled eggs." Theodora laughed. "Chicken salad and chocolate cake. Lemonade in Famos bottles, spilled salt." Theodora rode over luxuriously. "They're wrong about ants, you know. There were almost never ants. Cows maybe, but I don't think I ever did see an ant on a picnic." "Was there always a bull in a field? Did someone always say, 'But we can't go through that field, that's where the bull is'?" Theodora opened one eye. "Did you used to have a comic uncle? Everyone always laughed, whatever he said, and he used to tell you not to be afraid of the bull. If the bull came after you, all you had to do was grab the ring through his nose and swing him around your head." Elena tossed a pebble into the brook and watched it sink clearly to the bottom. "Did you have a lot of uncles?" "Thousands. Do you?" After a minute Elena said, "Oh yes, big ones and little ones, and fat ones and thin ones." "Do you have an Aunt Edna, Aunt Muriel? Kind of thin, rimless glasses." A garnet brooch, Elena said. Does she wear a kind of dark red dress to family parties? Lace cuffs. Then I think we must really be related, Theodora said. Did you used to have braces on your teeth? No, freckles. I went to that private school where they made me learn to curtsy. I always had colds all winter long. My mother made me wear woolen stockings. My mother made my brother take me to dances, and I used to curtsy like mad. My brother still hates me. I fell down during the graduation process. I forgot my lines in the operetta. I used to write poetry. Yes, Theodore said, I'm positive we're cousins. She sat up laughing, and Elena said, Be quiet. There's something moving over there. Frozen shoulders pressed together, they stared, watching the spot of hillside against the brook where the grass moved, watching something unseen moving slowly across the bright green hill, chill in the sunlight and dancing little brook. What is it? Elena said in a breath, and Theodora put a strong hand on her wrist. It's gone, Theodora said clearly, and the sun came back and it was warm again. It was a rabbit, Theodora said. I couldn't see it, Elena said. I saw it the minute you spoke, Theodora said firmly. It was a rabbit. It went over the hill and out of sight. We've been away too long, Elena said, and looked up anxiously at the sun touching the hilltops. She got up and quickly found that her legs were stiff from kneeling on the damp grass. Imagine two splendid old picnic-going girls like us, Theodora said, afraid of a rabbit. Elena leaned down and held out a hand to help her up. We'd really better hurry back, she said, and because she did not herself understand her compelling anxiety, added, the others might be there by now. We'll have to come back here for a picnic soon, Theodora said, following carefully up the path, which went steadily uphill. We really must have a good old-fashioned picnic down by the brook. We can ask Mrs. Dudley to hard-boil some eggs. Elena stopped on the path, not turning. Theodora said, I don't think I can, you know. I don't think I really will be able to. Elena, Theodore put an arm across her shoulders. Would you let them separate us now that we've found out we're cousins? Okay, so that is the end of chapter 2, and that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. So thank you, whoever dropped by. Thanks, Cindy, for popping up in the chat, and I'll definitely plan on doing more later in the week on the stream. But thanks, everyone, and I'll see you all again soon. Good night, Cindy.